As both an architect and environmental activist for over 50 years, I can't think of a better example of systemic failure than the visible signs of dereliction that we see all over our villages, towns and cities. A shortage of housing has been one of the biggest political and social issues in Ireland in recent times. Yet, so many of our buildings lie empty and are falling into ruin. Ireland has one of the highest rates of vacancy and dereliction in the developed world. And most of this is in our historic urban centres. How can it be that at a time when there is such an extreme shortage of homes in Ireland, that so many buildings are left empty and falling apart? Dereliction is not just a blight on the neighbouring community, it's also a major environmental problem. So why is the rate of vacancy and dereliction so high in Ireland? And what should be done about it? If left unaddressed, vacancy leads to neglect and then to dereliction, which then has a contagious effect, spreading through an urban environment, eroding the cultural and economic potential, which can eat away at the morale and identity of communities. As an architect, it particularly saddens me seeing our historic buildings neglected and falling into ruin. But these scenes must be many times more hurtful to those who struggle to find a place to call home.
We're not really making good use of our spaces anymore. It's kind of heartbreaking walking around the city now, seeing the epidemic of homelessness that's going on and just boarded up buildings everywhere. It makes no sense.
Every street you go down in Dublin, you talk about it, it's at least one, if not more. And the longer these places are left derelict, the worse state they get in, the bigger threat they become to the neighbouring houses also.
I'm genuinely concerned for our younger generation in Ireland who are being priced out of home ownership.
Can't even conceive thinking of saving for a mortgage. I can't conceive renting for the rest of my life and moving constantly. So yeah, it's a very tough place to be as a young person in Ireland, I think, at the moment.
It's creating a division in our society and alienating a whole generation who are the future of our economy and country.
These kind of derelict properties are like gaping, existentially worrying wounds that are just clogging up our city and illustrating that the values of the people who run the city are not really aligned with the values of people who live in the city.
There's a race on to get homes built, to release the pressure on housing. But getting vacant homes occupied could be the biggest and fastest solution to the housing crisis. Why can't these buildings be repurposed for those who need them? To get a better picture, I'm meeting with Frances Doherty of the Peter McVerry Trust at one of their newest projects where they're renovating a derelict house.
Well, the Peter McVerry Trust is a national housing and homeless organisation, so people will know us best for providing emergency accommodation and supports to people that are homeless, mainly in Dublin, but we're a national organisation now, right across the country. What we're trying to do is get more and more housing, create more pathways out of homelessness into sustainable, high-quality housing for people, so that we're taking down the number of people in hostels all the time, and we're giving more keys to the door to more people to a better future. So the two things that we've tried to do is to show the practical delivery of reusing empty homes. So we're reusing derelict houses, over the shop, transforming commercial to residential, reusing things like we've turned a bank in Cork into 5 apartments. We are reusing old school buildings that have been empty for 30 or 40 years because they're the early 1900s. Better use of what we have already in existence would go a long, long way to addressing the pinch point in housing supply in urban centres.
So how quickly now will you get this ready for somebody to move into?
So we hope to turn it around within 3 months now. And that's sort of another benefit of these sort of reuse projects where you take a vacant property and you make it available for social housing. It's much quicker than going out and trying to build one. It's actually quicker than trying to buy one with the legal process. The beauty of projects like this is that they can be turned around so quickly. They are cost effective. So no more empty home. A household taken out of homelessness, given a key to the door, and the family that owns the property are able to say that they're helping to tackle the homeless crisis. The target now is nationally, everybody involved in this space to deliver at least 500 of these repair and lease homes a year. That would be great, but it's still a fraction of the overall empty homes in the country. We know there's over 180,000 vacant homes.
180,000 vacant homes.
So, we only need 10% or less of those homes to end homelessness in the country.
It's great to see a small charity like this do so much to help end homelessness, but they can't do it all. I want to understand more about the systemic problems that have led to these high rates of vacancy and dereliction in Ireland. Last year, I met with 2 activists in Cork. Dr. Frank O'Connor and Jude Sherry are circular economy scientists who've brought their knowledge and skills to get a handle on the problem of dilapidation in their home of Cork City.
When we met last year, we had started a thread on Twitter, which was basically posting a derelict property every day. And now we've reached over 400 properties on this Twitter thread, which are all derelict properties across the city.
And this is what you're looking at, yes, and this doesn't look so good, does it?
No, it doesn't.
There are multiple reasons why a building can end up in a state like this. Family illnesses or family deaths, for instance. So what's different between Ireland and other countries, for instance, is a combination of culture, but also a combination of enforcement of laws. So we do actually have laws in Ireland that can tackle dereliction. They're just not being fully enforced. And as you can see here, there's a problem, is that this house has probably been left empty for so long that eventually it starts to decay. The owners board up the buildings to make sure no one can get into it. And then over time, it just decays so much that it's no longer even close to being habitable.
So what we're finding here is vacancy obviously tends to be the gateway to dereliction. So we have very high levels of vacancy in Cork City and, like you say, across Ireland. But then obviously when something is long-term vacant, you're going to have problems. Someone will break a window, that will have a knock-on effect, you'll lead to social issues.
No, and look at how next door, they've looked after their house so well, I mean, the contrast is huge when somebody appreciates and looks after their home.
It really shows you what the potential is in these historic buildings, that they can be beautiful, loving homes. There's many reasons, excuses we heard. For instance, we hear often that we need new legislation before we can tackle dereliction. But actually we have a Derelict Sites Act since 1990, so that we have a Sites Act that can enforce 7% levy on these properties if they're on the registry. It can also CPO the property as well, and it can also prosecute the owners. Now, this property is not on the register. So
not on the register?
Not on the derelict register.
Really? And this was on your list last year, was it?
This is on the list. We've given a list of hundreds of properties to Cork City Council over 6 months ago, and in that time they've only added 2 properties to the derelict registry.
So what should we do about this, Jude?
We need a combination of compulsory rental orders, vacant homes tax, and compulsory sales orders for long-term vacant buildings. What a vacant homes tax will do is make sure that it's taxed when it becomes empty after a certain amount of time, and that hopefully will prevent buildings getting into this level of dereliction.
And let's not forget, a lot of these old buildings, they're more than a building. There's that heritage value.
History
and
too.
The history. And that anchors people to the location. It's so important for their well-being, for their sense of place, and also for the local economy. So job creation, tourism, and I think we're missing out on so much by not having that change in mindset. And for us, it saddens us to think that we're actually knocking a lot of wonderful buildings the future generations could have enjoyed as well.
When a building lies empty, dampness, decay, and then dereliction creeps in quickly. Once one building falls into ruin, then more tend to follow. This phenomenon is known as the broken glass effect. Vacancy and dilapidation can be the catalyst for a snowballing demise of urban communities. But what is being done by local authorities to tackle dereliction in Ireland? And is this enough? Ireland's Derelict Sites Act of 1990 is the single piece of legislation that we have to tackle dereliction. Most of the responsibilities for enforcing this act is left to local authorities, who have a very mixed track record of addressing this issue. I spent a few days walking around Cork City, and on almost every street I found derelict properties. Most of them, to my surprise, I found are not on the derelict sites register. So what are the local authorities really doing about all this? Cork City Council have been refurbishing buildings in the city to be used as social housing, and it's here, at one of their latest developments, that I arranged to meet Paul Moynihan, Director of Corporate Affairs at Cork City Council. Is this the development that you were talking about?
It is indeed. Welcome to Shannon Street.
Looks very fine.
Yeah, most recently developed in the last number of weeks. It's the development of 9 apartments on what was a derelict site, and those are providing units for older people and to provide a sheltered location within their communities where the services can be provided for them.
Paul, I know the City Council have been doing an awful lot of work like this property here over the last number of years, and that is really great to see. But we look at the number of properties out there that are derelict. You have about 97 or so houses on your list, in that order.
Thereabouts, yeah.
Why is there such a mismatch between what Frank and Judy found? How come their list is 450 already and growing, when yours is only 97?
Ours is 97, but it should be borne in mind last year, due to COVID restrictions, there was no inspections done. They weren't essential services, and we have a backlog that we're working through.
But if I look over that list, going back to 1993, I still see loads of properties derelict or going into dereliction over the last 15, 20 years. You know, so what I mean is the problem is going back a long time, and it seems to be getting worse, not better.
That may appear so. It is interesting.
Well, is it not the case, though?
We find in our own experience, roughly 25%, a quarter of the reported dereliction cases to us on inspection are not found to be derelict.
But if you take the situation out there, there's an awful lot of young people that can't afford to buy houses, that would love to live in the city centre of Cork. It's a great city to live in. But they can't buy these properties because they're not being put on the market. Why can't you compel household owners to sell their property?
We are working with individual property owners, be they single properties and single owners, or be they multiple owners and developers, but we are working with owners in various forms to bring resolution to dereliction in partnership with us.
Is there enough of a disincentive for those people that are letting their properties fall down and that are devaluing to sell their houses, basically?
Well, it's something I have no doubt that the Oireachtas Committee is looking at, and in fact there was an interesting proposal proposed by the Heritage Council in relation to compulsory selling orders. If that was available to us, a tool to require the sale of a property by compulsory means, that would be a solution.
while many would argue that local authorities are not doing enough within their powers to stamp out dereliction, the reality is that the fundamental cause of dereliction is vacancy, and there is currently no legislation in Ireland that targets vacancy specifically. As I travel around the country, I see dereliction creeping in everywhere, and this is being felt by local communities. Are there families living in these houses too?
Yeah, that was a doctor's house, that one that's derelict there at the moment.
Doctor's house, and need a family here?
And there was a family.
Yeah.
I think a lot more emphasis should be done on old houses, bring them back to life. Yes. Because there are loads of houses around the country. And you know, there's young people looking for houses now. They mightn't realise the potential that's in it. I love old buildings, and I love to see them being brought back to life.
I'm a born Saravan. I was born here in 1947, and I was always proud of our town. But there was a time when we had 11 pubs in the town. Now, I'm not going to say we're all alcoholics or anything like that, but we had a great little town. I feel that derelict buildings are a sad thing.
You'd love to see them done up, and you'd love to see people living in them, you know. I really would. I'd love to see the street throbbing and thriving as it was, even way back years ago, when these houses were built.
There's Main Street, Elphin, and I don't believe there's a handful of people living on the street itself.
Like, is half of it vacant?
There's at least more than half of it.
More than half the town vacant?
More than half the town.
If you take all the upper floor level
If you have to
too?
take off, like there's nothing going on any of the upper floors.
Okay,
at all.
so 50% already gone from that.
Well, if nothing happens, where is it going? It's going nowhere, Duncan, because those buildings are going to, they'll be just derelict. I hate to see the town go down, and unfortunately Elphin isn't the only town. It's all those sort of smallish towns that suffered with this.
Mayo County Council are one local authority where I have heard some real efforts are being made around vacancy and dereliction. They've been proactive in this area and have recently innovated with a new website for logging and tracking vacant homes, an idea inspired by their Director of Services, Tom Gilligan. When I see dereliction like this, is it that people don't want to live in the town, or is it that there's no demand for housing in the area?
Recently, there was a report that came out that indicated that in Mayo, there was only about 23 properties for rent in the entire county.
What?
Of Mayo.
And how many people are looking for houses?
You know, we have a housing waiting list of just under 1,400 people. So you have people not only on the social housing list, but you also have people, particularly now with COVID, we have people remote working who are coming into the county, who want to live here, who want to work here, who want to establish roots here. So, you know, the need for housing is becoming more and more acute.
So what can Mayo County Council do about this problem?
There's a number of things that we're doing at the moment, Duncan, and I suppose if I can take you to this property here, which is the old Garda Barracks, and this has been vacant since 2007, recently acquired by Mayo County Council. So our plan is to turn this into social housing.
Well, it's great to see Mayo County Council taking on these projects and restoring these buildings, but is it the solution to the big problem across Ireland of dereliction?
It's part of the solution, Duncan. We need to look at broader leverages as well in order to encourage owners of vacant property to bring them back into use. And one thing that I would advocate and I think is being looked at by the government is the whole issue in relation to a vacant home tax. And I think in a sense that vacant home tax will certainly be the first step in order to encourage more and more people to bring homes back into use, because bringing properties back into use helps create additional revenue streams as well. You know, it brings more people into town, it increases footfall, so it's a win-win for everyone.
Tom isn't the only one in Ballina with an eye on the future. Mark Duffy and Kevin Loftus were dismayed by the high rates of vacancy and dereliction in their hometown of Ballina, so decided to move back to bring their skills and energy to help turn it around. Mark has recently been elected to the council and teamed up with architect Kevin on public realm improvements and in targeting the reuse of vacant buildings. This is a very attractive street here. I mean, this is a lovely space.
So it's a great example of an urban intervention by the local council, and it lends itself quite well to the streetscape.
So what do you see as the main problem?
A lot of times when businesses close here, the town becomes quite quiet at night time. And that's because, as you see in the buildings above us, there's no one living above the shops. On this street, there's just 2 families living on it.
The whole street?
Yeah, whereas
above.
Historically there would have been up to 60, 70 families on these streets and down these laneways.
Some of the finest structures in terms of quality of space throughout the country are in our town centres, and they're just going totally unused. And just to show you, Duncan, some of the huge potentials that exist in the towns aren't just on the main streets. If we take a walk through these laneways, we'll see that there's so much possibility to actually activate the places behind.
Yeah.
These are places where you can have pedestrian access.
This is lovely here now.
It's a totally different world.
So there must be huge potential here, is there?
Absolutely. This can be residential, this can be retail, it can be vibrant, it can have all of the energy that makes towns exciting.
We know that the young people want to live in the town centre, but we must make it an attractive place for families to live. And part of that involves safe walking and cycling infrastructure, connecting it with schools and businesses, but also to create amenity value, to create green space where people can meet and make it an attractive place for families. Here we're in Market Square, which would have formerly been the hustle and bustle of a marketplace, and currently it's just car parking.
So you would much rather see no cars parked here, presumably?
This should be a public plaza. Absolutely. This should be, and there's plans to make this
a
public plaza indeed, yeah, but throughout the town we should be able to remove parking to give space over for people. Yeah. Pedestrianisation, sure. Activities, events, energy, vibrancy. These are all of the things that really make a town live and breathe. Sure. And that's what's attractive, and that's what will bring people back in.
It's heartening to hear from young community activists like these that are breathing new life and hope into towns like Ballina. Our city centres and all of our towns have a real chance of thriving again if we can finally change our mindset and policy around property.
Not many people set out to leave a building derelict, but they can. And that can happen because we don't have laws necessarily to stop it at the moment. And the laws we do have around dereliction are not being enforced.
This needs to be a #1 issue. It's a pandemic that we have, it's a blight in our society, it's a stain that we have. We need to eradicate it.
Now, a vacant homes tax would really mean, okay, there's a stick there, the stick's going to get bigger every year if you don't reuse it, and people are going to start losing significant sums of money if they're sitting on lots of empty properties.
Most of these vacant buildings have all the utilities in place, so the cost of bringing a vacant building back into use is less than it would be for a new build as well.
We'll never have a livable environment until we really tackle vacancy and dereliction, because what we want is for people to move back into urban environments, and particularly we want families to move back in.
Where do we want the future to be? What's the vision for our towns and villages? How do we get young people back into the centre? How do we get that multi-generational life back into our towns?
Ireland at least needs an open and transparent property register with baseline data to finally see if the problem of vacancy and dereliction are getting better or worse.